Beneath the fractured moon, a silver scar wept across the sky, mirroring the wound that would not heal in Celine's soul. The air in the great hall of Eldridge Keep hung heavy with the scent of pine smoke and ritual incense, but it did little to mask the bitterness of rejection. Celine Hartmore stood at the center of the raised dais, her bare shoulders trembling, not from the chill that seeped through the stone walls, but from the weight of 100 eyes, pack elders, warriors, and kin, boring into her like winter thorns. At 28, she was no fledgling. She had endured the cycles of moon and frost, waded through seasons of quiet hope, only to face this, the marking ceremony, the sacred rite where bonds awakened like stars igniting in the night. The Alpha, Lord Garrick Thorne, her intended mate by decree of the council, loomed before her. His form was a tower of shadowed muscle, eyes like polished obsidian reflecting the flames of the ceremonial torches. The moon's pale light filtered through the arched windows, casting elongated shadows that danced across the fur-strewn floor. He had been chosen for her strength, they said, her lineage tracing back to the old lunar seers, though no gift had stirred in her veins. Tonight, under the goddess's gaze, it was meant to change. But as the ritual elder chanted the invocation, his voice a low rumble echoing off the vaulted ceilings, Garrick's hand hovered over her collarbone where the mark should bloom. The air thickened, charged with the electric hum of impending union. Celine's heart pounded, a wild drum in her chest as she felt the faint pull, the instinctive thread of Omega to Alpha, fragile as frost on a breath. She lifted her gaze to his, searching for the spark, the recognition that would bind them in blood and fate. It never came. Garrick's lip curled, a flicker of disdain crossing his chiseled features. "She's unfit to bear the mark," he declared, his voice slicing through the hall like a blade through silk. The words landed with the force of a blizzard, cold and unrelenting. Gasps rippled through the assembly, but no one moved. The elder's chant faltered, the incense smoke curling upward in lazy spirals, as if the very air mourned the fracture. Celine's world tilted, unfit. The word echoed in her mind, a venom that seeped into her bones. She had trained, meditated under the full moons, offered prayers at the lunar altars in the hidden groves. Yet here, in this moment of raw vulnerability, her body betrayed her. No surge of power, no glowing sigil etching into her skin. Garrick withdrew his hand, as if scorched, turning to the council with a shrug that belied the cruelty in his eyes. "The bond does not awaken. She carries no fire in her blood. Cast her out, as the old laws demand." The hall erupted in murmurs, a tide of judgment washing over her. Kin she had known since puphood averted their gazes. Warriors who had once jested with her now whispered of weakness, of Omegas who failed to serve the pack's legacy. Celine's throat tightened, the metallic tang of unshed tears coating her tongue. She was no stranger to solitude, the quiet vigils in the frost-laced forests, the way the wind whispered secrets she could never quite grasp, but this was exile wrapped in shame. Banished not for treason or frailty of limb, but for the silence of her soul. The elder stepped forward, his robes whispering against the stone, and placed a hand on her shoulder. It was meant to be solace, but it felt like chains. "Celine Hartmore, by the light of the goddess, you are severed from the pack. Seek your path in the wilds, or fade into shadow." No ceremony for her pain, no rite to soften the blow. Just the cold finality of tradition, etched in the annals of their kind. She was led from the dais, her feet numb on the flagstones, the torchlight flickering like dying stars. Outside, the night embraced her with a ferocity that mirrored her inner storm. Snow fell in relentless sheets, blanketing the mountain paths in white silence. The wind howled through the pines, carrying distant weavos, wolves calling to the moon, indifferent to her fall. Celine pulled her cloak tighter, the wool rough against her unmarked skin, and descended the winding trail from Eldridge Keep. No escort, no provisions beyond a waterskin and a dagger. The pack's mercy extended only so far. Hours blurred into a haze of cold and motion, her breath clouding the air like ghosts of unspoken pleas. The ruins of the old battlefield emerged from the storm as dawn's gray light pierced the clouds, a vast, scarred plain where a century ago rival packs had clashed in a war that birthed no victor, only endless graves. Weathered stones jutted from the snow like broken teeth, remnants of ancient barricades and toppled totems. Here, the earth still remembered. Faint crimson stains frozen beneath the ice. Whispers of blood spilled under the same fractured moon that had witnessed her rejection. Celine collapsed against a crumbling archway, the stone biting into her palms. The wind tugged at her hair, silver strands whipping like banners of surrender. Why me? The question clawed at her chest, raw and unanswered. She had always felt the pull of something deeper, a dormant hum in her blood, like the tide waiting for the moon's command. But tonight, it had slumbered still, leaving her adrift. Was strength merely the absence of breaking, or the will to rise from the shards? As the snow deepened, muffling the world, a low rumble stirred the horizon. Thunder, perhaps, or the approach of something far more ominous. Armies, they said, were massing again on these cursed grounds, reigniting the flames of 100-year grudge. Celine pressed her back to the ruins, the cold seeping into her marrow. In this forsaken place, where destinies had shattered like ice under claws, she wondered if her own fracture might finally awaken, or consume her whole. The moon dipped lower, its light a pale promise on the snow, and in that silver glow, Celine traced the faint outline of a scar on her palm, long faded from a childhood fall. It pulsed now, faintly, as if the night itself yearned to etch her anew. But for what purpose? Mercy in the wilds, or a deeper trial? The wind carried no answers, only the echo of weavos, drawing nearer, as if the goddess herself held her breath. The wind's howl sharpened into a chorus of snarls, slicing through the veil of snow like claws rending flesh. Celine huddled deeper into the shadow of the crumbling archway, her fingers numb against the dagger's hilt, the blade a meager ward against whatever storm brewed on the horizon. The ruins of the old battlefield stretched before her, a graveyard of jagged stones and frozen earth where the ghosts of a century's rage slumbered uneasily. She had come here not by choice, but by the inexorable pull of exile, a place where the pack's laws dissolved into the indifferent wilds, and a shamed Omega might vanish without echo. The rumble grew, no longer thunder, but the thunder of hooves and boots churning the snow into bloody slush. Torches flared in the distance, their flames guttering like wounded hearts, casting erratic shadows that clawed across the plain. Armies, yes, rival packs converging once more on this cursed soil, reigniting the feud that had devoured fathers and sons alike. Celine's pulse quickened, a frantic rhythm against the cold that clawed her lungs with every breath. She should flee, melt into the tree line where the pines stood sentinel, but her limbs betrayed her, heavy as the shame that anchored her here. A cry pierced the gale, raw, guttural, the sound of a beast cornered and defiant. It drew her gaze eastward, where the snow churned in a frenzy of motion. Figures burst from the white haze, warriors in steel-gray armor, their cloaks emblazoned with the raven crest of the Iron Fang clan, pursuing a lone rider on a faltering steed. The horse stumbled, its flanks heaving steam into the night, and the man atop it, a colossus even in flight, leapt free as it collapsed, rolling into the snow with a snarl that echoed the wolf's ancient call. He rose like a specter forged from the storm itself, broad-shouldered and clad in a mantle of midnight fur, now torn and bloodied. His sword gleamed in the torchlight, a curved arc of silvered steel, but he wielded it not with fury, but weary precision, fending off the encroaching pack. One attacker lunged, Axe raised, the stranger parried, his blade biting deep into the assailant's shoulder, spilling crimson that steamed on the frost. Yet for every foe he felled, 2 more closed in, their eyes alight with the zeal of vendetta. Celine's breath caught, an instinctive tremor rippling through her core. Alpha. The word bloomed unbidden in her mind, primal and undeniable, stirring the dormant hum in her veins like a whisper from the deep. He was no mere warlord. The air around him thrummed with the weight of command. A king's aura laced with sorrow. His face, half veiled by a hood matted with snow, bore the sharp lines of one who had stared too long into the abyss, high cheekbones scarred by old battles, eyes like storm clouds, heavy with unspoken regrets. King Alaric Voss of the Silverstorm realm, she realized with a chill, that had nothing to do with the weather. Whispers from the keep had painted him as a relic of the old wars, ethical to a fault, melancholic, burdened by the ghosts of decisions that had cost him his queen and half his kin a decade past. Duty had chained him to the throne, guilt to his solitude. Their eyes met across the fray, or so it seemed, a fleeting lock that sent a jolt through her, electric and forbidden. Fear coiled in her gut, sharp as the wind's bite, mingling with a curiosity she dared not name. Why him? Why here, in this forsaken scar of history? She pressed against the stone, willing herself invisible, but the pull lingered, a thread tugging at the unmarked hollow of her collarbone. Alaric staggered as a blade grazed his side, fresh blood blooming dark against his tunic. He dispatched another foe with a roar that shook the snow from nearby stones, but exhaustion etched his movements, his breaths ragged plumes in the air. The Iron Fang warriors circled, their leader, a hulking beta with a sneer, barking orders. "The king falls tonight! End the Silverstorm line, and the battlefield is ours!" Celine's hand tightened on her dagger, an absurd impulse to intervene, warring with the terror of exposure. She was no warrior, no marked Omega to claim glory. She was the unfit, the cast aside. Yet as Alaric's gaze swept the ruins, finding her hiding place, something shifted in his expression. Not recognition, but a flicker of desperate calculation. He bolted toward the archway, snow spraying in his wake. The pursuers howling in pursuit. She could run, slip away into the night, leave this king to his fate. But the thread pulled tighter, instinctive, born of the Omega's ancient code to aid the wounded Alpha, even as her mind screamed denial. Curiosity won, a fragile bridge over the chasm of fear. As he reached the shadow of the ruins, she extended a hand, not in welcome, but in silent question, her palm upturned, the faint scar pulsing like a vein of moonlight. Alaric halted mere feet away, his chest heaving, sword dripping red onto the white. Up close, the scent of him enveloped her, pine and iron, blood and the faint underlying warmth of fur by a hearth. His eyes, gray as winter steel, searched hers, wary and piercing. "You," he rasped, voice like gravel under boots. "Hide or fight? No time for ghosts in these shadows." The words hung between them, heavy as the falling snow, denying the spark that arced unspoken. Celine's heart thundered, the connection of forbidden ember in the cold, feared, questioned, yet alive. Behind him, the torches advanced, flames devouring the night. In that suspended breath, the ruins seemed to hold their collective sigh, the fractured moon bearing witness to a meeting neither could refuse. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments of the night they find you. The shadows of the archway swallowed them whole, a fragile sanctuary amid the ruins' jagged embrace. Celine's hand lingered in the air a heartbeat too long, her fingers trembling as Alaric's gaze bore into her, demanding alliance in the face of encroaching doom. The Iron Fang torches bobbed closer, their flames carving bloody paths through the snow, illuminating snarling faces etched with the hunger of old vendettas. She could still flee, slip into the labyrinth of fallen stones, let this broken king become another ghost haunting the battlefield. But the pull in her blood, that dormant whisper, anchored her. With a nod sharper than any blade, she gestured to a narrow crevice behind the arch, where the ruins folded into a hidden cleft, choked with ice and forgotten bones. "Hide," she whispered, her voice a thread of frost-laced resolve. "The cleft leads to caves. They won't follow blindly in the dark." Alaric's eyes narrowed, assessing her not as prey, but as an unexpected ally, the weight of his solitude cracking just enough to let curiosity seep in. He sheathed his sword with a fluid motion, the steel singing against leather, and followed her lead. They moved as one, instinct sinking in the chaos, her lithe form weaving through the debris, his bulk a silent storm at her heels. The wind clawed at their cloaks, carrying the acrid bite of torch smoke and the metallic tang of fresh spilled blood from the fallen warriors outside. Celine's heart hammered, each beat a clash of fear and something fiercer, unnameable. Who was she to shelter a king? An unmarked omega cast out like chaff in the gale. Yet here she stood, guiding him, her unmarked skin prickling as if the moon itself watched their descent. The cleft narrowed, forcing them shoulder to shoulder, the rough stone scraping Alaric's wounded side. He grunted, a low sound muffled by the howl of pursuit echoing above. "Why risk it?" he murmured, his breath warm against the chill air, stirring the fine hairs at her nape. "You're no Silverstorm. What chain binds you to this madness?" She didn't answer at first, focusing on the dim path ahead, where the ruins gave way to a yawning mouth of cave, veiled by icicles like frozen fangs. The air grew thicker, laced with the earthy musk of damp stone and ancient decay, the scent of places where secrets festered. Only when they slipped inside, the entrance sealing behind them like a reluctant tomb, did she turn to face him. Moonlight filtered through cracks high above, casting their faces in ethereal silver, highlighting the crimson streak on his tunic. "No chain," she said, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her limbs. "Just the wilds. They take in the forsaken, same as they spit out the weak." He leaned against the wall, sliding down until he sat on the frozen floor, his broad frame folding with the weariness of one who carried thrones on his shoulders. Blood seeped between his fingers as he pressed a hand to his side, the wound a ragged tear from axe or claw. Celine knelt before him, the cave's chill seeping through her knees, and without thinking, tore a strip from her cloak's hem. The fabric whispered as she bound it tight, her touch clinical yet gentle, born of years tending pack wounds in the shadows of greater wolves. His skin burned hot under her fingers, alpha fever raging against the cold, and for a moment, their eyes locked, his stormy gray holding hers, searching for deceit in the Omega's instinctive care. Empathy stirred then, unbidden, like embers catching in dry tinder. She saw not the king of legends, but the man. Lines etched deep by losses she could only guess at. The queen taken by betrayal, the kin scattered in endless skirmishes. Guilt shadowed his gaze, a mirror to her own shame, the rejection that had hollowed her out. "The Iron Fang," he said softly, breaking the silence as she tied off the bandage. "They hunt me to claim the old field. A century of blood, and they think my head will end it." His voice carried the melancholy of one who had brokered peace too many times only to watch it shatter. Ethical to his core, he had spared enemies in the past, earning loyalty from some, hatred from others. Now, duty demanded he fight, but the cost gnawed at him like frostbite. Outside, the snarls grew frantic, boots crunching snow as the pursuers scoured the ruins. A torch flared near the cleft, its light probing like a predator's eye. Celine froze, her breath shallow, the cave amplifying every distant crackle and curse. Alaric tensed, hand drifting to his sword, but she placed a palm on his arm, light, restraining. "Wait," she breathed. The wind shifted, carrying a low uivo from the tree line, not wolf, but something deeper, a warning from the wilds themselves. The iron fang voices faltered, one shouting of shadows moving unnaturally, another of a sudden squall burying their tracks. Minutes stretched into eternity, the cave a cocoon of held breaths and shared silence, until the sounds receded, swallowed by the storm. In that reprieve, the bond deepened, fragile as new ice. Alaric's hand covered hers briefly, a gesture of gratitude laced with restraint, his touch sending a ripple through her, a warmth that defied the cave's bite, stirring the dormant hum in her veins. She pulled away, rationalizing it as mere survival's illusion, the Omega's curse to mend the Alpha's wounds. Yet curiosity bloomed alongside the fear. What guilt chained this king to flight? What fire lay beneath his melancholic steel? He watched her now, not with command, but quiet wonder, as if she were a riddle etched in moonlight. The cave's depths beckoned further, a vein of darkness promising temporary haven. Selene rose, offering her hand once more, not as servant, but equal in this exile. Deeper in, there's a chamber with hot springs. It'll staunch the blood loss. He took it, his grip firm yet yielding, and they ventured on, the moon's pale glow fading behind them. Empathy had woven its first thread, turning strangers into sentinels against the night. But as the warmth of the spring steam curled around them, mingling with the scent of blood and pine, Selene felt the resistance crack, a bond forming not in passion's rush, but in the quiet choice to shield another broken soul. The moon above the ruins wept silver tears, and in the earth's hidden heart, two fates intertwined, denying the pull even as it claimed them. Steam rose from the hidden springs like the breath of the earth itself, curling in languid spirals that caught the faint moonlight seeping through fissures in the cavern ceiling. Selene led Alaric deeper into the chamber, the air shifting from biting cold to a humid warmth that clung to her skin like a lover's reluctant touch. The walls glistened with moisture, veins of quartz pulsing with an inner glow, as if the goddess had wept silver tears into the stone long ago. Her footsteps echoed softly on the slick floor, each one a measured denial of the tremor in her chest, the instinctive draw toward this alpha, rationalized as mere pity for a wounded king. She was no healer by right, only an outcast whose hands remembered the pack's forgotten arts, binding wounds in the quiet hours when shame kept her from the firelight. Alaric followed, his presence a shadow at her back, heavy with the scent of blood and storm-soaked fur. The bandage she had fashioned held, but crimson still seeped at the edges, staining the makeshift cloth a deeper red. He moved with the grace of one who had danced with death too often, his broad frame navigating the narrow passage without complaint, though pain etched faint lines around his eyes. Guilt shadowed him, not just from the wound, but from deeper scars, the queen's betrayal a decade past, her knife in the dark twisting not just flesh, but the throne's fragile peace. He had spared the traitor's kin in mercy, only to watch vendettas bloom like weeds in frost-bitten soil. Duty had become his chain, ethical resolve, a melancholy veil over the fire that once burned fierce. The chamber opened before them, a natural basin where hot water pooled in a shallow lagoon, fed by underground rivers that murmured like distant weavos. Selene knelt at the edge, testing the temperature with her fingers, the heat blooming through her numbness like a forbidden comfort. "Soak the wound," she said, her voice steady, though her pulse betrayed her, quickening at the proximity. "It'll clean the rot before fever claims you." She avoided his gaze, focusing on the steam's dance, the way it blurred the boundaries between water and air, much like the haze in her own heart. Fear of connection, warring with the Omega's pull to mend. He stripped off his tunic without hesitation, the fabric peeling away to reveal a map of old battles. scars like lightning across his chest, a tattoo of the silver storm crescent faded but proud on his shoulder. The fresh gash wept openly now, angry and inflamed, but he eased into the water with a hiss, the surface rippling around his form like moonlight on snow. Celine turned away, busying herself with kindling a small fire from damp twigs scavenged near the entrance, flint striking sparks that caught with a reluctant glow, casting the chamber in flickering amber. The flames crackled, feeding on the dry heartwood she coaxed forth, their warmth pushing back the cave's perpetual chill. Yet as she worked, introspection clawed at her. What strength lay in this act? Tending a stranger's pain when her own soul bore no mark? Mercy, perhaps, or the illusion of purpose in exile's void. Alaric's voice broke the rhythm of her thoughts, low and resonant over the water's lap. You move like one who knows these depths. Not a wanderer, then. What pack casts a shadow such as yours into the wilds? He leaned back against the stone lip, water lapping at his collarbone, his gray eyes fixed on her with that piercing melancholy, curious yet guarded, as if trust were a blade he wielded sparingly. She fed another twig to the fire, watching the flames devour it whole, embers rising like prayers to the unseen moon. Eldridge, she replied, the word tasting of ash. Rejected at the ceremony, unfit they called me. No bond awakened, no power stirred. So I wander, or fade. The confession slipped out unbidden, raw as the wind's bite, her fingers tracing the faint scar on her palm absent-mindedly. It had pulsed earlier, in the ruins, a faint echo of something buried deep. A gift, perhaps, from the lunar seers in her bloodline, dormant since childhood. He was silent for a moment, the water's steam veiling his expression. Then softly, rejection is the goddess's forge. It breaks to remake. His tone carried the weight of his own losses, the ethical king who had chosen peace over slaughter, only to lose more than he saved. Guilt flickered in his eyes, a storm cloud passing over steel. I know it well. My queen. She sought power beyond mercy. Her betrayal cost us the fragile truce with Ironfang. I've carried that shadow since, brokering alliances that crumble like snow under claw. Empathy bridged the space between them again, tender in its tragedy, born from shared fractures. Celine met his gaze at last, the firelight dancing in her silver hair, and felt the hum in her veins stir. Not the Omega's instinct, but something deeper, lunar and wild. Outside, the wind howled through the fissures, carrying the distant clash of steel and snarls, the Ironfang regrouping perhaps, or the rival armies drawing closer to the battlefield's edge. The cave trembled faintly, dust sifting from the ceiling like fine snow, and with it came a pressure in her chest, building like a tide under full moon. She rose, drawn to the water's edge, her hand outstretched as if to steady the world. The war. It calls you back, she murmured, but her voice faltered as the scar on her palm ignited, not pain, but a radiant glow, silver light bleeding from her skin like liquid moonlight. It spread, tendrils of ethereal force weaving through the air, illuminating the chamber in a pulse that synced with her heartbeat. Visions assailed her, waves of lunar energy crashing over the plains, halting blades mid-swing, binding foes in threads of frost and revelation. The dormant power erupted, not in violence, but in revelation. A pathfinder's gift, unseen for generations. The ability to weave destiny's threads under the moon's command. Alaric surged from the water, droplets scattering like stars, his eyes widening in awe and recognition, the glow reflected in his gaze, turning gray to silver. You, he breathed, stepping closer, water pooling at his feet. The seers spoke of one like you, a key to end the cycle, not through blood, but light, the 100-year war. Your power could still it, reveal the truths buried in the frost. His voice held no command, only the melancholic wonder of a man glimpsing redemption's edge. Yet doubt lingered in her, the rejection's echo whispering of unworthiness. Was this destiny's claim, or another illusion to shatter? The light faded as quickly as it came, leaving her trembling, the scar smoldering faintly. Outside, Weavos rose in answer, as if the wilds acknowledged the awakening. Alaric reached for her hand, his touch a bridge of fire and ice, but she pulled back, rationalizing the surge as fever's trick. The bond tugged insistent now, resisted yet undeniable, a key turning in the lock of fate. In that moment, under the cave's veiled moon, Selene felt the weight of choice. Embrace the power that marked her anew, or let it slumber, freeing them both to shadows. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your hidden light. The cave's glow lingered in Selene's veins like a half-remembered dream, the silver light from her scar fading into a warm throb that echoed the distant rumble of thunder outside. She withdrew her hand from Alaric's reach, the air between them thick with steam and unspoken fracture. The hot springs murmur, a counterpoint to the storm brewing in her chest. His touch had been a spark, gentle, seeking, yet laced with the king's unyielding duty, and she rationalized the shiver it ignited as the cave's treacherous warmth, nothing more. The power that had surged through her, weaving visions of lunar waves crashing over battlefields, felt like an intruder's claim, not her own. Unfit. The elders' voices whispered from memory, their judgment a change she had fled only to find mirrored in this awakening. Was this gift a redemption, or another rejection in disguise, demanding she step into a war she had no stake in? Alaric watched her retreat, water dripping from his frame to pool at his feet, his gray eyes shadowed by the fire's dying embers. The bandage on his side held firm now, the spring's minerals knitting flesh with reluctant mercy. But the deeper wounds, guilt carved from a decade of fragile pieces, flickered in his gaze. "It cannot be denied," he said, voice low as the earth's hidden rivers, stepping fully from the water. His silhouette loomed against the quartz-veined walls, a colossus forged in frost and fire, yet his posture held no command, only the melancholy of one who had bartered his soul for the pack's survival. The Pathfinder's light. The seers foretold it, an omega unmarked by man, but chosen by the moon to unravel the threads of endless strife. You've halted nothing yet but the pull. It draws the war to us. She turned away, feeding the fire with a handful of damp roots, the flames hissing in protest as they consumed the offering. The scent of charred earth mingled with the mineral tang of the springs, grounding her in the cave's primal pulse. Outside, the wind's howl sharpened, carrying the unmistakable cadence of approaching howls, not wild wolves, but the disciplined chorus of a pack on the hunt. Ironfang, or worse, scouts from her own eldritch kin, drawn by rumors of the king's flight and the battlefield's rekindling fury. The ruins above trembled, fine dust sifting down like ash from a funeral pyre, and Selene's scar pulsed in warning, a silver vein beneath her skin urging her toward the entrance. Fear coiled tight in her gut, not for the blades or claws, but for the confrontation it promised. The past crashing against this fragile now, forcing choices she had buried in exile's snow. "We cannot stay," Alaric murmured, donning his tunic with swift efficiency, the fabric clinging to his damp skin like a shroud. His sword hung at his side, a curved promise of blood under moon, but his hand hovered near her shoulder, restrained, as if he sensed the Omega's instinctive yield warring with her hard-won solitude. The armies mass at dawn. Ironfang leads the charge, but Eldridge circles like vultures, seeking to claim the field through alliance or betrayal. Your light. It calls them, even now. The words struck like frostbite, peeling back the layers of her denial. Eldridge, her pack, her blood, the ones who had cast her out under the Great Hall's torches. their eyes cold as the pine smoke that choked the air. Lord Garrick's rejection echoed clearest, his disdainful curl of lip, the way he had withdrawn, as if her touch were poison, unfit to bear the mark that would bind her to legacy and him. She had retreated to these ruins to fade, not to ignite a war's end. Yet the hum in her blood insisted. Visions flickering at the edges of her sight, rival alphas clashing under the fractured moon, blood staining the snow in crimson arcs, until her lunar force wove through them, revealing hidden truths. Traitors in Eldridge's ranks, the Queen's old betrayal rooted not in ambition alone, but in Ironfang's poisoned whispers. A snarl echoed from the cleft above, boots crunching ice as shadows probed the entrance. Celine's heart seized, the fire's warmth turning to ash in her throat. Alaric drew his blade in a whisper of steel, positioning himself between her and the threat, his body a shield born of duty's unyielding code. But she stepped forward, the scar igniting once more, silver light bleeding into her palms like molten moonlight. "No," she breathed, the word a choice carved from the core of her rejection. Freedom or love, solitude's liberty, or the redemptive bond that tethered her to this melancholic king, whose ethical heart mirrored her own buried compassion. The cave amplified her resolve, the spring steam rising in answer, veiling them as the first intruder burst through. It was Garrick himself, flanked by 2 Eldridge betas, their armor glinting with the pack's crescent emblem, eyes alight with triumphant zeal. Snow clung to his cloak like accusation, his face a mask of calculated fury, the same obsidian gaze that had scorned her now widening in shock at the scene. The king, wounded but unbowed, and Celine, glowing like a lunar altar come to life. "Traitorous cur," Garrick spat, sword raised, the blade catching the firelight in a red sheen. "Hiding with the enemy, and you, unmarked wretch, leading him to our doom? The council demands your head, Voss, to seal the alliance. The battlefield will be Eldridge's, and this forsaken Omega's blood the ink." Alaric tensed, his grip tightening, but Celine raised her hand, the light surging in a wave that halted them mid-stride. Frost threaded the air, binding their boots to the stone, not in harm, but revelation, visions assaulting their minds. Garrick's secret pacts with Ironfang's spies, the rejection at the ceremony a ploy to exile her before her power could expose his treason. The air hummed with lunar force, the cave's walls echoing the gasp of truth unveiled, blood's old debts surfacing like stains beneath thawed ice. Garrick staggered, his snarl twisting to fear, the betas exchanging uneasy glances as the alpha rival's facade cracked. "You chose power over pack," Celine said, her voice steady as the moon's arc, the light coiling around her like a crown of frost. Pain lanced her chest, the betrayal's sting deeper than her own rejection, kin turning blade inward for ambition's throne. Alaric's hand brushed her arm, a silent anchor, his guilt mingling with hers in the shared moral precipice. Forgive this fracture, weaving mercy into war's end, or unleash the light to shatter them, claiming vengeance as freedom's price. The wind outside roared, Weavos converging like judgment's tide, the fractured moon peering through the fissures as if the goddess weighed their souls. Garrick lunged against the bonds, eyes blazing with desperate rage. "Lies! She's deluded, cursed by her failure!" But the light pulsed brighter, revealing more. The 100-Year War's true spark, not pack rivalry, but a traitor's web spun from the Queen's death, threads leading back to Eldridge's heart. Celine's breath caught, the choice a blade at her throat, compassion to heal the rot, binding her to Alaric's redemptive path, or liberty's cold release, letting the visions fade and the packs devour each other in ignorance. The cave held its breath, fire crackling like a heartbeat, blood scent sharp in the steam as the past confronted them under the moon's unblinking eye. In that visceral clash, strength revealed itself not in claw or crown, but in the mercy to forgive what broke the soul. The cave's quartz veins throbbed with the afterglow of Celine's light, casting fractured silver across the intruders' faces like accusations etched in frost. Garrick strained against the lunar bonds, his muscles corded and veins bulging like rivers of ink under his skin. But the threads held, not chains of cruelty, but veils of truth, peeling back the layers of his deception with inexorable grace. The betas at his flanks shifted uneasily, their swords half drawn, eyes darting between their alpha and the omega they had once dismissed as shadow. The air hummed with the scent of heated stone and spilled secrets, the hot spring steam coiling thicker now, as if the earth itself exhaled in judgment. Celine stood at the chamber's heart, her palm upturned, the scar a radiant sigil that pulsed in time with the distant thunder rolling over the battlefield ruins. Pain twisted through her like a winter root, not from the surge, but from the raw wound of betrayal unveiled, her own pack, her blood, poisoned at the core by ambition's venom. Alaric remained at her side, his presence a steady anchor amid the storm, sword drawn but lowered, his gray eyes fixed on Garrick with the melancholic steel of one who had witnessed too many thrones crumble under greed. Guilt shadowed his features, an echo of his queen's fall, the mercy he had extended, then now mirrored in this moment's precipice. He had spared traitors before, brokering fragile pieces that cost him kin and crown alike, and now duty warred with the budding bond to this woman, urging him to shield her light even as it exposed the fractures in his realm. "The web unravels," he said, his voice a low rumble over the water's lap, carrying the weight of ethical resolve. Eldridge's hand in Ironfang's rise, your packs, Garrick, fed the war's endless hunger, not for glory, but to bury the old queen's truths and claim the field unopposed. Garrick's laugh barked harsh, devoid of mirth, echoing off the walls like shattering ice. Truths? From an unmarked whore and a fleeing king? His obsidian gaze locked on Celine, laced with the same disdain that had scarred her at the ceremony, but now undercut by fear, the fear of a rival alpha dethroned by revelation. He lunged again, the lunar threads straining, and one beta broke free, charging with a roar that shook loose pebbles from the ceiling. Alaric met him in a blur of motion, blade clashing against blade in a visceral symphony of steel and spark, the cave amplifying each strike into thunder. Blood sprayed, hot and coppery, arcing across the steam to splatter the spring's edge, where it bloomed like crimson petals on the water's surface. The beta fell, clutching his throat, his final gurgle lost to the wind's howl seeping through the fissures. Celine's breath came ragged, the light in her scar flaring brighter, weaving outward in tendrils that halted the second beta mid-swing. Visions cascaded anew, not just for the intruders, but bleeding into her own mind. The great hall's torches flickering as Garrick whispered vows to Ironfang envoys in shadowed alcoves, his rejection of her a calculated exile to silence the dormant power that might expose him. Her kin's faces flashed, elders who had turned away, warriors who had murmured of weakness, all unwitting threads in his tapestry of treason. The pain deepened, a visceral ache in her chest, as if the moon itself tore at her ribs. Freedom tempted her then, a siren's call to unleash the light fully, to shatter Garrick and his illusions, letting the packs collide in bloody ignorance while she slipped back into solitude's embrace. No bond, no duty, just the wild's indifferent mercy, washing away the shame of being unfit. But Alaric's glance caught hers amid the fray, stormy eyes holding a depth of shared fracture, his melancholic plea unspoken. Choose compassion, not as weakness, but as the forge that remakes what war destroys. The bond tugged insistent, resisted in her rational mind as Omega's folly, yet blooming tender in the quiet spaces of her soul, love as redemption's proof, not a crown to claim. Garrick twisted free at last, the threads fraying under his raw fury, and barreled toward her, sword raised in an arc that promised the blood of old debts. "You'll die unmarked as you deserve," he snarled, the blade whistling through steam-thick air. Time fractured. Selene raised her hands, the lunar force erupting not in destruction, but a radiant wave that enveloped him, freezing the swing in midair. Frost bloomed along the steel, creeping like veins of ice, while truths hammered into his core. The 100-year war's genesis, not blind rivalry, but a forged letter from Eldridge's hand, igniting the first clash after the Queen's death to mask their role in her poisoning. Garrick staggered, the sword clattering from numb fingers, his face contorting in horror as the vision stripped him bare. Ambition's hollow throne, the pack's loyalty a pyre he had built himself. He collapsed to his knees, the cave's floor slick with his beta's blood, and for the first time, vulnerability cracked his alpha facade, tears carving paths through the grime on his cheeks. Outside, the Weavos swelled into a cacophony, the rival armies converging on the ruins under the fractured moon's gaze, torches flaring like distant stars, the wind carrying the metallic promise of renewed slaughter. Alaric sheathed his blade, stepping forward to loom over Garrick, but his hand extended not in violence, but restraint. "End it here," he urged Selene, voice laced with the guilt of his own past mercies. The ethical king, seeking not vengeance, but a path through the moral mire. "Forgive and bind the packs in light, or release him to the storm, and let war claim its due. Your choice crowns us all, or breaks what little remains." Selene trembled, the scar's glow dimming to a faint pulse, the steam veiling her vision like unshed tears. Love or freedom, to forgive this betrayer, weaving her power into Alaric's redemptive duty, accepting the bond that marked her as more than unfit, or to sever it all, granting Garrick the liberty of his shadows while she claimed her own, wandering unmarked under the moon's indifferent arc. The cave held its breath, fire's embers crackling like a fading heartbeat, blood scent mingling with the earth's warm breath. In that suspended agony, the goddess's symbols whispered through the quartz, moonlight on frost, fire's quiet devotion, urging a strength born not of claw, but of the mercy to heal what had rent the soul asunder. The wind roared louder, judgment's tide rising, and Selene felt the precipice's edge, her heart a battlefield where destiny and will collided in silvered silence. The quartz walls of the cave wept rivulets of condensation, mirroring the silver tracks tracing Selene's cheeks as the lunar light ebbed from her palms, leaving her hands trembling and empty. Garrick knelt before her, a shattered monument of ambition's folly. His broad shoulders slumped under the weight of unveiled truths. The forged letters, the poisoned chalice that had felled Alaric's queen. The centuries' war spun from Eldridge's shadowed greed to cloak their ascent. His obsidian eyes, once cold with rejection's blade, now gleamed with the raw terror of a soul stripped bare, breaths coming in ragged plumes that mingled with the steam rising from the bloodied springs. The fallen beta's life ebbed into the water, crimson tendrils unfurling like forgotten banners, while the surviving warrior backed against the stone, sword forgotten, his face a mask of dawning horror. Outside, the fractured moon hung low over the ruins, its pale gaze piercing the fissures like a divine indictment, casting elongated shadows that danced with the encroaching storm. Weavos swelled into a symphony of fury, Silverstorm packs thundering from the northern pines, Iron Fang legions surging from the eastern crags, Eldridge warriors circling like wolves, scenting weakness. The wind howled through the cleft, carrying the acrid bite of torch smoke and the metallic tang of drawn steel, the battlefield awakening once more in a frenzy of hooves and snarls. Selene's scar throbbed, a persistent heartbeat syncing with the chaos, urging her toward the precipice where choice awaited, to unleash the Pathfinder's full force, a cataclysm of lunar revelation that might end the war in one visceral wave, or to withhold it, granting freedom's cold solitude, letting the packs devour their secrets in endless blood. Alaric's hand found her shoulder, his touch a steady warmth against the chill seeping from her core, ethical resolve etched in the lines of his face, melancholy deepening the storm gray of his eyes. He had lost too much to vengeance's cycle, the queen's betrayal a scar deeper than any blade, his mercies twisted into vendettas that hollowed his throne. Yet in her, he glimpsed redemption's fragile thread. The bond resisted in rational whispers, now blooming insistent, tender as moonlight on frost. "The light is yours," he murmured, voice a low rumble over the spring's murmur, his breath stirring the fine hairs at her nape. "Not to shatter, but to mend. Forgive him, Celine. Bind the fractures with compassion's fire, or release us to the wilds, unmarked and free. I will stand with you, whatever crown you choose." The words pierced her, a balm and a wound, stirring the Omega's pull she had denied since the ruin's first spark. Love was no immediate blaze, but a slow forge in the heart's exile, resisted as folly, rationalized as survival's illusion, now accepted as the proof that rejection could birth something unbreakable. Garrick lifted his head, vulnerability cracking his alpha facade, a plea unspoken in the quiver of his jaw. "Celine," he rasped, the name tasting of ash and regret, "I cast you out to silence what I feared, the power in your blood. It would have unmade me. Mercy, if any lingers, end this rot before the moon drinks more blood." Pain lanced through her, visceral as the wind's claws. The memory of the great hall's torches, flickering like dying stars, his rejection, a public flaying that had driven her to these forsaken stones. Kin turned traitor, the pack's legacy poisoned at its root. Yet in that agony, rebirth stirred, the dormant hum in her veins rising not as curse, but as destiny's claim. She stepped forward, the cave's steam parting like a veil, and extended her scarred palm toward Garrick. The light ignited anew, not in furious waves, but a gentle radiance that enveloped him, threading through his form like silver roots seeking fertile soil. Visions cascaded once more, but tempered now with healing's grace. The truths shared not as weapons, but bridges, revealing paths to atonement. Garrick confessing to the elders, Iron Fang's leaders glimpsing the webs unraveling through Scout's eyes, Silver Storm's banners halting mid-charge under the moon's sudden clarity. He gasped, the lunar force knitting not flesh, but fractured loyalties, his body arching as redemption's fire burned away the venom of ambition. The surviving Beta dropped to one knee, the light touching him too. Whispers of peace echoing in his mind, like distant Weavos calling truce. Outside, the storm faltered, the army's roar fracturing into confused murmurs, torches guttering as ethereal waves of moonlight crested the ruins, halting blades mid-swing, binding foes in shared revelation. The 100-year war's ghosts rose in the snow, crimson stains thawing to reveal buried totems of unity long forgotten, the fractured moon mending its scar in a rare alignment, bathing the plain in unbroken silver. Celine swayed, the surge draining her like a tide's retreat, but Alaric caught her, his arms encircling her waist with a tenderness born of shared rebirth. Guilt's shadows lifting from his gaze as he pressed his forehead to hers, the bond sealing in blood's quiet vow. No mark etched by decree, but claimed in choice's fire. "You are the key," he whispered, his voice laced with wonder and the melancholy joy of one redeemed. Not to power's throne, but compassion's eternal flame. Their lips met then, soft as falling snow, a union forged in the cave's hidden heart. Love as sacrifice's cure, the Omega and King intertwined against the wild's indifferent breath. Garrick rose unsteadily, the light fading from him, his eyes meeting hers with humbled steel. "I will bear this truth to the packs," he vowed, voice rough with newfound purpose, turning toward the cleft as the wind softened to a sigh. The cave emptied, the spring steam curling upward like prayers answered, leaving Celine and Alaric in the quartz glow's afterlight. The battlefield beyond lay still, armies dispersing under the moon's mended gaze. The war ended not in slaughter, but in the mercy of unveiled souls. Rebirth bloomed in her chest, warm as hearth fire, the scar on her palm a constellation of stars, rejection transmuted to destiny, exile to realm. As dawn's first blush pierced the fissures, painting the stone in gold and blue, they emerged hand in hand, the ruins whispering of legends remade. The goddess's symbols lingered, moonlight on thawed snow, fire's embers in the heart, blood stains washed to fertile earth. Strength, Selene knew now, was choosing mercy's crown, weaving love's redemption through the fractures of fate. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.